We've got people at polar ends of the equestrian world who are fighting each other. If you think the horse isn't right, you're probably correct. And therefore you are right to pursue further investigation. Absolutely shocking, the amount of misinformation that is spread. So I think you once again have to trust yourself. You know your horse the best. Anybody can learn this. Anybody, as long as you put your mind to it and you watch carefully and think about what you're seeing. Most vets were taught at vet school to deal with all sorts of different types of animals, and they never received specialist training in lameness diagnosis or poor performance diagnosis. If something's really not right, you have the responsibility to your horse to say, we need to stop. A combined approach using veterinarian, physiotherapist or other manual therapist, a good farrier and a good saddle fitter is a pretty good team to have.
It's interesting, isn't it, where the blame is being placed, if you like, trying to distract away from the problem and blame the rider instead of focusing on what could be a deeper issue.
The horse's welfare should be the number one thing. If you're training a horse, it gets various chemicals released in the brain, just as we do if we're running, that make them feel better.
Oh, tell us about those 24 behaviours that we should be looking out for of a ridden horse in pain.
Sue Dyson is an equine orthopaedic specialist and researcher. Sue has worked with horses for over 40 years as a clinician and has published over 370 peer-reviewed research papers. She's also trained her own show jumpers and event horses. Her horse Kenvara jumped clear in the Olympics in 1988 and 1992. Sue feels passionate about educating equestrians. After extensive research, Sue found that behaviours often considered bad or naughty, their communications telling us that our horse could be suffering. And her documentary, The 24 Behaviours of the Ridden Horse in Pain, has been watched by over 420,000 people worldwide. So, do we really know what a happy horse looks like? And what is your horse trying to tell you under saddle? Let's find out, shall we?
Sue, welcome to Curious Equestrian, and can I start by saying a huge thank you for being here. We are all so excited to have you on the podcast, and I'm urging anyone who hasn't seen your brilliant documentary, The 24 Behaviours of the Ridden Horse in Pain, to go and watch it immediately because it's fascinating and it's brilliant. And we'll delve into the impact of that documentary on you a little bit later on in the podcast. But first of all, talk us through the inspiration behind you seeking to research horse behaviour and pain.
Well, I've been a veterinarian for many, many years, and my specialisation was in lameness and poor performance. And it's been very clear to me for a long time that people were rather poor at recognising lameness. And that includes not just riders and trainers, but also veterinarians, saddle fitters, across the board. And that there were quite a lot of horses that were performing poorly, and it would be the rider that would be blamed, or the horse would be blamed for being lazy or unwilling or uncooperative or naughty. And I didn't perceive it like that. I felt that these were ways in which the horse was trying to communicate with us that something wasn't right. And having had my own horses, I've ridden all my life, I've had top-level horses, and I've also had some not-so-good horses. Some of the not-so-good horses were not so good because they were uncomfortable. I was witnessing firsthand the influence that discomfort can have on performance. And because people were slow to recognise lameness, they would tend to bring the horse for investigation when problems have been present for many, many, many months, if not years. And the longer a horse has been uncomfortable, the more likely it is to develop secondary problems. It's going to stiffen its back, it's going to lose muscle, it may overload another limb and therefore develop lameness in another limb. So the longer the problem's been there, the more difficult it is to resolve, to enable the horse to go back to full function. And I therefore thought, well, if we could teach people to better recognize behavioral manifestations of discomfort, then perhaps they would be quicker to request investigation. And if we could encourage vets also to take this on board, then maybe they would push themselves to develop their lameness skills better, or refer horses to somebody else rather than just saying it must be a training-related problem or a behavioral-related problem. And when we started the work, I knew that we were going to be able to prove what I needed to prove, that we would be able to identify that there would be some behaviors which we would see much more commonly in lame horses compared with non-lame horses. And that's what we set about to do.
And tell us about those 24 behaviours that we should be looking out for of a ridden horse in pain, Sue?
Well, we started by looking at video recordings of both lame and non-lame horses. And we developed a list of 117 behaviours, which is a rather unwieldy number of behaviours. And we applied that list of 117 behaviours to a group of lame horses and a group of non-lame horses. And from that, we were able to identify 24 behaviours, the majority of which are at least 10 times more likely to be seen in a lame horse or a horse which is uncomfortable compared with a non-lame horse. And when we're talking about lame here, we're not necessarily talking about the horse which is obviously limping. We're talking about the horse which may just lack hind limb impulsion because effectively it's lame on both hind limbs, you're just not aware of it. So each of the 24 behaviours has a specific definition. So, for example, ears back behind a vertical position for 5 seconds or more, or repeated tail swishing, or, for example, repeated incorrect strike off on the wrong leg into canter. So it's really important to recognise that each of the behaviours does have a specific definition, and that the demonstration of one behaviour is neither here nor there, because each of the behaviours could be due to a number of different causes. So it could be the rider had been ineffective in applying the right cues, so the horse struck off on the incorrect leg leading into canter. The important thing is that we have demonstrated that if a horse displays 8 or more of these 24 behaviours, it is highly probable that it has underlying discomfort. Now, there are some lame horses which score less than 8, but if a horse scores 8 or more, it unquestionably, in my mind, has discomfort, and we need to find out what the cause of that discomfort is. The behaviours that are shown don't tell us about where the pain is coming from. They don't necessarily tell us about the severity of the pain. They just tell us that this horse is trying to communicate that it is uncomfortable. And we have to bear in mind that horses tend to try to protect themselves, to mask lameness, because they are inherently prey animals. So they don't want to look weak and vulnerable. So they have various mechanisms by which they disguise lameness. So they take shorter steps. They may reduce their hind limb impulsion. They tend to stiffen the back, so there's a reduced range of motion of the back. And they tend to have their legs on the ground for a longer period of time so that they can share load between the legs. And all of this makes it more difficult for many people to identify lameness. Whereas if you apply this checklist of 24 behaviours, it is a way of, with a certain amount of certainty, being able to say, yes, this horse is uncomfortable, or no, this horse is absolutely fine. Give yourself reassurance that your horse is okay. So it can work in both ways, positively and negatively.
Thank you to the supporters of this show, our amazing Curious Equestrian community. We've had a few messages asking how we can keep in touch between episodes, so we've created something super special just for you, the Curious Equestrian newsletter. You'll gain access to our personal insights on every interview, articles written by guest speakers and authors, and equine experts who are pushing the boundaries on what we think we know about our horses. You can subscribe for free or choose the paid membership to get the full access to the archive, behind the scenes and exclusive content. Right, let's jump back into the discussion. And can you run us through some of these behaviours that we should be keeping an eye out for?
So we'll start with the head. So the head moving up and down and up, but not in rhythm with the trot. So not reflecting a fall in lameness. The horse repeatedly moving its head from side to side. Doesn't have to be continuously, but if you episodically see the horse move its head from side to side, that is not normal. The horse repeatedly tilting its head so that the nose points, for example, to the right and the left ear goes downwards. The horse's head being behind a vertical position for 10 seconds or more, for 10 degrees or more, or the horse's head being above a vertical position for at least 10 seconds, at least 30 degrees or more. And the mouth being open with separation of the teeth for 10 seconds or more. So it doesn't count if the lips are just separating, the teeth actually have to be separating. Seeing the tongue outside the horse's mouth on a repeated basis. Now, in some horses, it will loll out all the time. In other horses, you may just see the tip pop out episodically, but it has to be on a repeated basis. The bit being pulled through to one side of the horse's mouth. And then there are gait markers. So the speed being too hurried, which is defined as more than 40 steps per 15 seconds, or the horse having an irregular rhythm, so going faster and then slower and then faster again. Or the gait being too slow, which is defined as less than 35 steps per 15 seconds. And this often looks like a rather passage-like trot if the horse is a dressage horse. The horse moving on 3 tracks. So instead of the hind limbs following the tracks of the forelimbs, the hind limbs are deviated to one side. So effectively, for example, the left hind limb is not following the track of the left forelimb, it's on its own track. The horse repeatedly swishing the tail. The horse not following the direction of the rider's cues. So instead of, for example, going down the long side of the arena, the horse spontaneously deviating across to the left. The horse being unresponsive to the rider's cues, so that it has to be given strong leg cues repeatedly, or the horse stopping spontaneously and just not going forwards. The horse rearing, the horse bucking, the horse either striking off with the incorrect lead in canter or becoming disunited behind, and the horse spontaneously changing in its gait. So, for example, breaking from trot to canter or from canter to trot or trot to walk without the rider asking it to do so. I think we've probably got to 24.
That was very impressive, Sue. And something that really struck me as you were listing them out, some obviously more subtle than others, some more obvious, some that actually only professionals like yourself would see when observing a horse, and some that we've all seen on the yards that we've been on, at the riding schools that we've ridden at. And actually, some of those given labels, like the swishy tail. I've ridden horse at riding schools where they say, oh, just showing excitement, she's showing expression. That's just what she does. She swishes her tail about. Or, the reluctance to go forward, being called a lazy horse. Those that are labelled a girthy horse when you're tacking up at a riding school. Oh, just get on with it because that's them, and you have to get through the sort of difficulties of that pony, and then you just get on board and off you go. Why has it become acceptable to give these horses and ponies these labels and continue riding them?
Well, I think it just shows how antiquated the equestrian world is, and the fact that the reason so many of these horses at riding schools are suitable for a beginner to learn on is because they're slow. And they're slow often because they have got some degree of discomfort. So we all learn to ride at riding schools. And I went through exactly the same experience. Mum bites, and that she's always done that, so that's normal for Mum. And Nymph is her daughter, so she bites as well. And Robert always has his ears back. And I grew up with this. But I think So it's become normalized, and everybody accepts that that is normal for horses. But we know that it isn't, because we've demonstrated that if you take a horse demonstrating these behaviors and you remove their pain by the use of nerve blocks, by which I mean you can desensitize part of the leg and take away the pain, then those behaviors immediately reduce in number. So the horse may be showing 9 out of the 24 behaviors, and it immediately goes down to 2 or 3 out of 24. So that demonstrates to us that those behaviors are not habitual, they are induced by pain. And I think it's really important that we discuss with everybody that these are not normal behaviors for horses. There is an underlying reason for them, and that it really is, these are myths in the equestrian world. And it takes a long time to change people's perceptions, particularly with some of the older trainers. They are not very open-minded, I don't think, in acceptance of the fact that we do need to change, that we do need to accept that these behaviors are indeed a manifestation of discomfort. Now, obviously, if the horse just showed one behavior, for example, it was switching its tail repeatedly, that may be because there are lots of flies about. So it's really important that we remember it's the total score that counts, not the display of individual behaviors. And just because a horse only scores 5 doesn't mean that it can't be uncomfortable. That may be a really stoical horse. The pain may be very low grade. And obviously, if we see a horse hacking out around the countryside, not being asked to do anything very biomechanically demanding, it may look much more comfortable than that same horse put in an arena being asked to do lots of circles, which it finds uncomfortable, and it's going to be more likely to display behaviors under those circumstances than out on a pleasurable hack.
And how do you go about assessing these horses, Sue? When someone approaches you, what does that process look like?
Well, you made an interesting comment earlier, I think, which I meant to pick up on, which you said that some of these signs are very subtle and that can only be picked up by professionals. Well, I think anybody can learn this. Anybody, as long as you put your mind to it and you watch carefully and think about what you're seeing. And if you have a tick list, then you can tick each behavior off. So I like to do this. If I'm doing it live, I will stand in the corner of the arena along the short side so that I can watch a horse on the right rein go away from me, go past me from looking at it from the side, and then back towards me along the short side as it's working on one rein. And then when the horse changes the rein, I will shift myself to the opposite corner. So again, I can see the horse from behind, from the side, and coming towards me. So I can see the horse from all perspectives. So I can see if there's a head tilt. I can see if the horse is moving on 3 tracks. I can see from the side if the bit is being pulled through to one side. And if you do it, you practice doing it. It's like any tool. If you practice, you'll get better at doing it. And I think that although there are some behaviors, and I missed one, I missed the intense stare, and I also missed repeated closure of the eyes. Yes, I missed too.
It's a long list without a script, so isn't it? It's a long list to remember.
The intense stare, some people find difficult to comprehend. It's a rather glazed expression. It's just not engaging with its surrounding. But once you've seen it and appreciated it, then it's relatively easy, I think. And we've published a book, Harmonious Horsemanship, in which there are lots and lots of pictures illustrating each of the behaviors to try and encourage people to become familiar with what normal looks like and what abnormal looks like. And you need to know what normal looks like, because when you know what normal looks like, then abnormal jumps out at you. So I watch horses for between 5 and 10 minutes going through their normal repertoire of work. So if it's a low-level rider, I just ask them to ride as they normally would do. And then I may ask them to do more frequent transitions. I may ask them to do smaller circles, like 10-meter circles in rising trot to the left and to the right, which can be very revealing because it's a bit more difficult for the horse. Sometimes the riders find it a bit more difficult too.
Yeah.
But if it's an upper level dressage horse, then I need to see it do its full repertoire of movements, because if it's just doing working trot around the periphery of the arena, it may find that very easy. Whereas if I ask it to do a canter pirouette or sequence flying changes, then that may be more difficult, and it may be under those circumstances that many more behaviors become apparent. And it's important to realize that historically, people have tended to say, well, if the horse has got a 4-beat canter, it's just because you're not riding the horse forward enough. Whereas a 4-beat canter is not normal for a horse. And therefore, I think it's really important that we see horses not only in trot, but also in canter, because some of those abnormalities in canter are in fact pain-induced. So it's really important that we see the horse in all paces. And sometimes, although the checklist was designed to be used in horses working on the flat, sometimes if the horse, for example, has a history of bucking on landing, I want to see the horse jump because I want to see how it lands. I want to see if it's landing with the correct form and leading, if it's pushing off squarely from behind. So making additional observations. And there are other additional observations. So, for example, if the horse is sweating disproportionately to the intensity of the work and the environmental temperature and humidity, that's an additional sign that the horse is probably uncomfortable. Likewise, if its respiratory rate is too high and takes a long time to recover after exercise, that's also not normal. If the horse is constantly defecating, passing droppings, that's probably because it's stressed. And the reason for its stress is because it's uncomfortable. I want to ask the rider, do they have normal rein tension? Do they have a symmetrical feel in the contact in the left and right reins? And if they don't, that's not normal. And the rider will often say to me, but I'm right-handed, so I'm stronger in my right hand, so I'm always going to feel difference. But that's not the case. That is something being induced by the horse. Similarly, if the horse is leaning on the hand, or even just not taking a contact, that too can be a sign that this horse is adapting its body posture because it's uncomfortable. So these are things outside the checklist, but are things that I'm also looking at for myself.
So I love how you mentioned that it's very subtle, and actually we can learn those subtle observations ourselves through books, through watching videos, and actually encouraging us to do that, and making horse owners feel empowered that we have that control, that we're able to work on those skills. And I was just wondering, how does your approach differ, do you think, in comparison to booking in a call out with our local veterinary practice, who often, from personal experience, may just involve a sort of walk and trot up process, or sending the equine off to a veterinary hospital?
I think you have to step back and say, well, most vets were taught at vet school to deal with all sorts of different types of animals, and they never received specialist training in lameness diagnosis or poor performance diagnosis. They were never taught how to assess horses during ridden exercise. So they've never had the basic training that I think is necessary to get to the bottom of these problems. Some people have gone through postgraduate education and they have acquired those skills. And I don't think that it needs fancy equipment to get to the diagnosis a lot of the time. It needs clinical skills. So you've got to be able to do a good physical evaluation. So you've got to know how to look at the horse and its muscle development and its muscle symmetry and its posture and its conformation and how it's trimmed and shod. You need to have a system whereby you feel the horse from the head through to the tail and all 4 limbs, and having trained yourself to do something in a systematic way. And the more you practice, and I would do the same evaluation on every single horse, the more you are able to detect subtle changes or subtle abnormalities. And then you have to have trained yourself how to look at horses and how a normal horse should move, recognizing that a child's pony is not going to be the same as an upper level dressage horse. So you have to know what is normal for each type of horse. And you need to know how a normal horse should work on the lunge. It should go similarly to the left and to the right. And if it suddenly doesn't want to go to the right, there's obviously a reason. And nobody should be making excuses. There has to be an underlying reason, assuming the horse has had adequate training, obviously. And then we need to, in most instances, if the problem is low grade, see the horse ridden. And then the principle of diagnosis is determining where the pain is coming from. And in some horses, based on your initial, very thorough clinical evaluation, you may have, for example, elicited pain when you flex the fetlock, which is an indication that the fetlock might be the painful area. But in order to prove that, we need to desensitize the fetlock region and see if the horse moves better afterwards. So, step one, identify which you think are the problem limbs or the problem area in the horse, and then attempt to take away the pain using nerve block techniques, and then reevaluate the horse move, looking at its quality of movement, the presence or absence of lameness, and also its behavior, because I'm expecting, if I identify all the problems, that I'm going to transform this horse from being, for example, a not very willing horse, which is giving the owner backache and is not really responsive to the cues, to a horse which is much more willing, has a much more extravagant way of moving, and now moves much more fluidly through its back, so it no longer gives the rider backache. So the principle is identifying the sources of pain. And then when we've identified the sources of pain, then we can start to use diagnostic imaging, so X-rays and ultrasonography, to try to determine the cause of the discomfort. And then when we've identified the cause or causes, we can then develop a treatment and management plan.
So what do you think is wrong or needs changing when it comes to the usual current process of diagnosing lameness and that step-by-step process?
Well, I think we need to educate vets more in terms of how to go about this, and to give them more confidence to do it, and also to encourage them that they can charge appropriately for doing it if they've got the right clinical skills. So if you feel confident that your vet is going to spend the time, then you're prepared to spend the money. Many vets use the excuse, well, I haven't got time to do this, and do all those basic clinical examinations that you're describing. But I would argue, I think that you can set aside that time and charge for it, and therefore get much more reward from a personal satisfaction point of view in terms of reaching a diagnosis for your client. So it's a matter of the client asking the vet at the right time, so not leaving it too late, but also the vets being prepared to invest the time and learn the skills in order to do this. And I think you have to bear in mind that if you were a runner, a competitive runner, serious competitive runner, you would not go to your GP if you had knee pain. You would probably first of all go to a sports physiotherapist, and if they were not going to put you right very quickly, they would advise that you went to see a medic that specialized in sports medicine. And the same applies to the horse. You're going to have specialist equine vets who only do horses, but they may not necessarily have the skills to be a performance horse vet. And then you have to differentiate. There are some people who call themselves sports horse vets, whose aim is to treat lots of joints and make money quite quickly. And this might sound a bit cynical, but this is what happens, rather than go through the diagnostic procedure. And I would always argue that there are times when you have to take educated guesses and perhaps medicate a joint because the horse has got something important coming up, like a major competition, and you may choose to medicate the joint and hope the horse improves. But hopefully you're going to come back and say, well, if it didn't work, we need to ask, why didn't it work? Where is the pain actually coming from? And so to me, the vets have always got to have inquiring minds, and the owners must follow their gut instinct. You said that earlier, follow your gut instinct. And we hear this time and time again. And in the book, Harmonious Horsemanship, there actually are stories about owners who've gone through this process. And many of them conclude, I needed to follow my gut instinct. I knew the horse wasn't right. And you as owners know your horse is the best of anyone. So if you think the horse isn't right, you're probably correct. And therefore you are right to pursue further investigation. And I think it's also important that you know as an owner that you have the ability to ask any vet to look at the horse. You can ask your vet to refer you to another vet who will maybe has the specialist knowledge that your local vet does not have. And I think that that's a win-win situation for everybody. If the local vet admits, well, I don't know, but I know somebody who does know and they will be able to help you. That's an important thing. And everybody then has trust in each other. And then I think we have to realize we have a team approach, because we can't think about the horse in isolation. You as the rider have an influence on the horse. So if you are sitting very crookedly, or if you cannot ride in synchrony with the horse, either because you don't have the right balance or you haven't got the right musculoskeletal strength and coordination, you're not going to be doing your horse any good. So you have to take some sense of responsibility for yourself, because you are part of this athletic team, even if you're only hacking around the countryside. And likewise, it's really important that the horse's tack fits it and the saddle fits both the horse and you, to enable you to sit as comfortably as possible and in correct a position as possible. And you've got to have a good farrier who's also going to be taking good care of the feet. So it's a kind of holistic approach to the horse, which is, I think, very important. And the owners and riders have to know that it is worthwhile having your saddle fit checked at least twice a year. And it's probably better to spend money on that than on buying an extra rug, which your horse doesn't actually need.
Oh, and so you talk about trusting our instincts, but how can we find the confidence to do that when sometimes that instinct is just a feeling, and we're surrounded by people who think that what we're seeing may be normal or fine or acceptable, and we have to push through that?
Yes, I know it's not easy. But I think using the checklist gives you a powerful tool to say, well, my horse is showing 8 of these 24 behaviors, so it must be uncomfortable. And although various people in the livery yard may say, oh, you're making it up, the horse looks as though it's moving fine, you can say, no, it's not fine. It's showing 8 of the 24 behaviors. It must be uncomfortable. And I think it's today with social media too, I see all sorts of posts and all sorts of ridiculous advice being given that makes me absolutely cringe. I don't engage myself, but I could spend all day trying to correct misconceptions that I see on social media. It's absolutely shocking, the amount of misinformation that is spread. So I think you once again have to trust yourself. You know your horse the best. And the more you observe your horse, the more you will be more certain than ever that something's not right. If the horse has changed, there has to be a reason for change. We shouldn't just accept that, he's not going as well for the last 2 weeks, I don't know why. There has to be a reason. And I think that the equine industry as a whole has not been questioning enough. There's not been enough of asking why. And I think that, sadly, this spreads across to the trainers and coaches as well, in that they are not aware enough of how discomfort can influence performance, and can influence performance with respect to the rideability of the horse, the rider's comfort, and the rider's safety as well. Because the horse that is uncomfortable may react in an unpredictable way. So it may suddenly spin round, or it may rear, and that's putting the riders at risk from a safety perspective, and it's going to knock their confidence. And then you get into a vicious circle, because then the rider becomes perhaps more restricted with their hand cues, and therefore the horse then gets confused because it says, well, you're asking me to go forward with your legs, but you're restricting me with your hands. So you're then creating a conflict situation. So we have to be aware of all these different individual facts that can come into play. And I think that I was speaking to somebody yesterday who said, my trainer said I had to use too long whips, and I knew this couldn't be right, so I stopped the lesson. And I said, that's fantastic, because that you will then have made the trainer think, hopefully, why did she not want to continue? I think we must be prepared to, if we don't feel something is right, to say we need to stop, because we have the responsibility to the horses. And I know that you as a rider, you want to finish your training session, but if something's really not right, you have the responsibility to your horse to say, we need to stop. Whatever all your peers may say to you, because your peers are also living, looking through rose-coloured spectacles a lot of the time. They don't know any better than you. You probably know more than them because you know your horse.
It's having that confidence,
Yes.
isn't it? And feeling empowered to be able to speak out and not be influenced by those around us. I mean, it does tie back into the conditioning we were talking about earlier that comes to us right the way across the equestrian industry, but also dates back to our childhoods or whenever we learnt to ride, and the people around us and the people that have taught us, and maybe our friends and family who look at horses and ridden horses in different ways. How do we change perception for ourselves, but also opening the eyes of those around us who might not think the same way as us, or who might not feel, who might not be on that journey yet?
Well, I think behavioural change in people is a very difficult subject, and I don't feel that I'm an expert in that area, because I've hit a brick wall with many clients who, although they've sought advice, have not then taken the advice because they thought they knew better for some odd reason. So I know that behavioural change can be challenging. But all I can say is that the more we can show what normal horses should be able to do and how they should appear and how they should be responsive to cues, the more we can see that, so we can see harmonious relationships between horses and riders, the more likely we are to be able to recognize when something is not right. And I think anybody who should say, well, if my horse always was willing to jump and now it's having the odd stop, you need to be asking why. There's to be a reason. And don't make excuses. Don't say, well, if the ground was hard, why is your horse... It's not just because the ground is hard, it's because the impact of the landing on the hard ground is probably creating discomfort due to a pre-existing problem. Now, there are two alternatives here. You investigate the problem, or you never run the horse on hard ground, so you never go cross-country on hard ground. So I think we need to realise that a change in performance usually reflects a problem, and we shouldn't be blaming something. Now, the horse may step up, so you may have been competing at BE 80, and you step up to BE 90, and you yourself may be riding a little bit more tentatively. But then you need to get advice from somebody who is encouraging to give you the confidence that you can do it and your horse can do it, and you know that your horse has only got 2 of the 24 behaviours of the checklist, so you know the horse is okay. So you know you've got to rev yourself up to be more positive in your riding. Because you get this kind of, it's a complex situation between the horse, the rider, confidence, trust, and capability. And they're all linked. And I'm the first to say that, not all horses are going to be tremendous athletes. So we have to recognize the limitations of each horse's athletic capabilities. But now also that there are some horses with low-grade lameness, that lameness stays exactly the same all the time, and despite the horse being in full work, and the horse is relatively rootable. So that's okay. So I'm not saying that no lame horse should ever be ridden. What I'm saying is that we need to be monitoring the horse and making a judgment about its level of discomfort or otherwise.
And I take it, Sue, as well, that there are a whole variety of different management options when you come to that conclusion. So once you've done your investigations, once a diagnosis and the problem has been found, then it's looking at management. And I guess for some horses, it means they can't do certain things, but for others, things can be put in place to make sure that the horse is comfortable and then can continue its ridden career.
Absolutely. I mean, the sooner you identify a problem, the more likely you are to be able to treat it and manage it successfully. There's no doubt about that. And for example, if the horse has got low-grade osteoarthritis of a fetlock joint, we can medicate the joint and we can provide pain relief. And osteoarthritis is not necessarily progressive. And therefore, if you catch it early, it may be completely manageable. Now, you may also have to address the trimming and shoeing. You may also need to be thinking about, the work patterns I'm going to ask the horse to do. But a combined approach using veterinarian, a physiotherapist or other manual therapist, a good farrier and a good saddle fitter is a pretty good team to have.
Strength in numbers.
Yes.
And you mentioned earlier, Sue, how sometimes your clients don't take on your recommendations, or sometimes they don't listen and off they go and you're not able to continue helping that horse. How difficult is it to tell owners really what they don't want to hear?
I think that owners often want to think that their horses can continue to do stuff. And generally speaking, they can, but there is the small number of horses, a small proportion, in which it is really unfair to keep going with that horse. And I think you have to I believe in being open and straightforward with people rather than saying, we can try X, Y, and Z, knowing that in my heart that X, Y, and Z is not going to work. Now, some owners need to go through that trial period when they do spend money, which I know is not going to be money particularly well spent, but they want to feel that they've tried everything. And that's perfectly reasonable as long as the welfare of the horse is not being compromised. And then they accept that at the end of the day, we can't get that horse right enough to do the job that they want it to do. And we have to accept also that there are some horses that are temperamentally unsuitable to downgrade their athletic expectations a lot. So not all horses are going to make happy hacks. Many will, but not every horse. So we have to look at each horse as an individual and also look at the horse-rider combination, because one horse may be difficult for one owner, but actually in a different management system with a different owner may become a much more easier animal to handle.
And do you think our approach with our horses needs to change? Because so often owners will buy a horse for, I don't want to say a selfish reason, but for a job that they want the horse to do. But actually, we need to remember these are individuals with certain mentalities, different characteristics, personalities, and then also different physical aspects as well, and challenges sometimes in some circumstances may then crop up physically along the way in that journey. Should we be being more flexible with the expectations of our horses?
Well, we've either got to be more flexible or we've got to be more selective with what we pick. And I think that people struggle to buy horses. They can look at a lot of horses and get frustrated that they're not finding the right one, and then feel desperation. The next one has to be the right one. But in fact, the next right one isn't the right one, but they buy it anyway, and it isn't the right one. And that was the wrong decision to make. I've been down there, I've done that, and I know that's wrong. So you've got to have the right instinctive feel that this is the right horse for you. Because if you don't have that instinctive feel from the beginning, it probably is not the right horse for you. And I think with respect to horse selection, we can also use the checklist before we even go and see a horse, or even when we do go and see the horse, because some horses will have been performing adequately, but actually they have got discomfort. So I would always say, if you go to try a horse, or if you're seeing video footage of a horse before going to try it, apply the checklist, because if the horse is showing 8 or more of the 24 behaviours, then it's not worth you proceeding any further. And that's another area where mistakes are made. And people are told by the vendor, oh, well, you're not riding it very well. When you get used to the horse, it'll go much better for you. But that's not really the case. These horses often have got that pre-existing problem, which you are not going to improve.
It's interesting, isn't it, where the blame is being placed, if you like, trying to distract away from the problem and blame the rider instead of focusing on what could be a deeper issue.
Yeah, so I see that also in seeing video footage of riders being trained. And I hear the coach saying, good, change the rein now, let's do a circle to the left, good. And I think, that's not good. That's not good. Not being constructive in your advice to the rider. Things can't be good all the time. Yes, you've got to try and build a confidence in the rider that they are capable of doing some things, but they've also got to be given advice about how to improve. And I think that trainers are at fault in not being necessarily critical enough of what they're observing in front of them. And either recognizing through different training we could improve that horse, or recognizing that the horse is actually uncomfortable and it's really struggling to do what we're asking it to do. But to continually say good when what I'm observing is not good, I don't think helps anybody, really.
Really, really interesting. Again, encouraging, Sue, you're encouraging that curiosity and that questioning that you say doesn't go on. It just everyone just sort of carries on how everything has been done over generations.
Having lessons is expensive. I mean, I've been a rider. I've had lots of lessons, and I've always felt that I wanted value for money. So I didn't want my coach standing there and talking on the phone. I wanted them to be focused on me, and I wanted to receive criticism. I wanted to be applauded. If something went really, really well, yes, it's really nice to have positive reinforcement that is really good. But I also wanted to know when things were not right and how to help me improve it so it got better.
I love it. I love that, Sue. It's so true, isn't it? And how can we trust that something's good if everything's always good? We want that, don't you? You need to know the problems to then know when you're really excelling. And at the beginning of the podcast episode, I mentioned how much I enjoyed watching your documentary on YouTube called The 24 Behaviours of the Ridden Horse in Pain, and go and watch it if you haven't already. But I wonder, Sue, what the impact was for you in making that documentary, because I'm not the only one who loved it. Over 420,000 people, huge numbers, have watched that documentary. What was that like for you?
It was pretty amazing. I'd never done anything quite like that before. And we had a lot of positive feedback. We obviously had some negative feedback as well. People would say, why have you got bits in horses? Why are you allowing horses to jump? It's cruel that horses should jump. Well, I don't feel like that personally. I feel that most horses actually do enjoy working. But I do feel that we're creating a global impact. And I've been in the veterinary world for more than 40 years, and I've been involved in lots and lots of different research projects, as well as being a clinician. And this development of the 24 behaviours has really had the biggest impact that I've achieved with anything else. So I'm very proud of it, but I just want it to get bigger and bigger and bigger, because we've still got we've still got a mountain to climb because of the entrenched views of so many in the industry. But I think that to be able to tell the story, because everybody should know that the 24 Behaviours documentary tells a story about Galina, a show jumper, and her lovely rider, Lauren, who is a very articulate young lady who showed great compassion with her horse, that it's easy to follow because it's a storyline that you're following. And education, I've learned, involves telling stories. You can't just put across facts. If you wind the facts around a story, it becomes much more palatable to people and engages with people.
That's so, so true. And did it feel like you were part of something exciting when you were filming? Could you kind of sense that this was going to gain a lot of momentum online?
Well, we filmed several horse rider combinations, and Galina and Lauren was the first. And I said at the end of that day, this was fantastic. we're not going to get better than this. And this was just so lucky because we'd had the previous person that should have done the job dropped out at the very last minute. So I was flying across the Atlantic, not knowing if we were going to have a horse and rider at the other end.
No!
Desperate. So when we found this horse-rider combination and the veterinarian which we worked alongside, that was just so good. And I knew at the end of that first day, this is going to be really brilliant because the horse-rider combination were just so engaging.
And how did it feel to see those numbers racking up and seeing the impact that it's having across the world, over 420,000 people?
Yeah, it's very exciting. I mean, it's nothing compared to some influencers, but for me, it's very exciting, yes.
And you talk about things needing to change in the future, Sue, but what needs to change now, do you think, in the equestrian world to make it a better place for our horses?
I think we've got a lot of infighting at the moment. We've got people at polar ends of the equestrian world who are fighting each other. And I don't think that fighting creates anything. We've got to try and find some middle ground where we accept that these are good practices and we all need to strive to those good practices. We're going to accept that some people won't want to use a noseband. They actually don't know that without a noseband, it's more likely that the bit is going to get pulled through to one side, and there's a greater risk of the horse developing cuts in the corners of its mouth. So we need to try and open and engage people in discussion about the pros and cons of various different techniques, and not get hooked up about upper level dressage horses being worked in roll cur when you've got far more horses at the lower levels who are chronically lame, who have got ill-fitting saddles and who've got riders that are sitting very crookedly, where in fact, I believe there's a much bigger welfare issue than there is at the top end of the sport. It's the top end of the sport that's in the headlines all the time. We need to accept that, yes, we can improve a few things at the top end, but it's the bottom end we've got to improve things more. And we've all got to try and come together and talk in a more consensual way, without lots of infighting. There are always going to be differences of opinion, but there has to be, for me, a middle ground when we can discuss the pros and cons of various things. But at the end of the day, the horse's welfare should be the number one thing. And that includes not just how we ride it, but also how we manage it, so that it has turnout, it has social interaction with other horses, that we're not overfeeding it, we're not overriding it. There are so many things that we need to do better, and I think we can do better.
And Sue, you've worked with horses for over 40 years. When you look ahead to the next 4 decades, what changes do you hope to see? And what do you hope will have changed for our horses then?
Well, I sincerely hope that we still have horse sports in the Olympic Games, because I think that that is a very, very good thing for horse sports in general, and that goes from the top down to the very bottom. I really do hope that there is more acceptance of what horses need for a good physical and mental well-being. I know that I had a pony in the back garden that was on its own. I know now that that wasn't a very good thing. I didn't know that at the time. So we've got to be, all of us, open-minded to listen to the knowledge that we have now and act upon that knowledge. And I just really want people to stop fighting each other and come together and think, these are the things that are best for the horse. And we must all have fun with horses. Horses are supposed to be fun. They're supposed to bring us enjoyment, and we are supposed to bring them enjoyment too. And I think we have to educate those people who say it's bad to ride horses to say, actually, it's not. If you're training a horse, it gets various chemicals released in the brain, just as we do if we're running, that make them feel better. So it's not wrong to be training or riding horses. Education is a kind of buzzword, but I think it's a bit of a turn-off for some people. And we need to be thinking about discussing the ways forward and coming to a broad agreement about the best practices for horses.
Sue, thank you so much for coming on the Curious Equestrian Podcast and sharing your knowledge and your expertise and your stories. Oh, it's just been fascinating chatting to you.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to and watching Curious Equestrian. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube so that you don't miss an episode and all that's coming your way, or you can subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you listen. If you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, that would really help us to find lots more lovely listeners. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Curious Equestrian Podcast. We'll see you next time.